to answer your question, yes. It doesn't matter what aspect of the movie you're talking about. Like, hey, was this part good, or was this actor good, or was this kind of aspect? Yeah, the answer is probably going to be yes. So there you go. Cue the music. Hey everybody, how's it going? How's everybody doing today? Welcome back. And today's film is simply titled The Call. And I really gotta say, Netflix has come out with quite a few horror slash like thriller, scary kind of movies or whatever, and they're a little bit hit and miss. Some are good, some aren't. But when they hit though, they like really have been hitting lately. I don't know what it is. The movie did start off a little bit rocky, to be fair, but eventually it found its footing and it just, this movie just goes, man. And while it's a pretty horrific ride, it was still quite riveting and I was just glued to the screen. And the basic plot of the movie is kind of why I thought it started rocky, is because it's basically the movie Frequency. That's basically the setup for the movie. But if you've never seen Frequency, it's basically a father and a son who can converse from like 30 years apart through a ham radio, and they try and solve a crime and a bunch of other stuff. This movie is basically that, but it's between two women. And it also just so happens to be basically the movie Frequency if pretty much everything went haywire and just went batshit crazy. And I personally was exceedingly entertained by it, even though it did get kind of gross here and there, but so what? Those are horror movies. That's what they do. The only real negatives I have about the movie are that the pacing felt a little weird for the first little bit of the movie, because I kind of said it takes a while to get going. But there's also there's a couple scenes, lines, or acting bits that I kind of wasn't like on board with necessarily. But since this is a Korean film, I'm not going to judge it too harshly because I don't really understand the flow of the language, so that's a little bit unfair. And for the most part, the acting did feel very genuine for the most part. But there were a few little itty-bitty things that were just kind of noticeably weird, like either somebody just kind of laughed really ridiculously that didn't feel believable, or there's a really tense moment that took a little bit, like 2 seconds longer than it should have for like somebody to pause in between their line. Just little nitpicky things like that. Aside from that stuff though, this movie was real stellar. I was really happy with it. And it's mostly because the movie was driven by these like really strong two lead characters. You know, the two women in question that are, contacting each other via the phone. And I'll continue to give this movie props, despite the fact that I felt super old, because the reason why they can communicate is because it's through a landline phone. Go figure. But as I said, I was really skeptical in the beginning. I'm like, wait, what is it? This is just Frequency all over again. Like, what is this? And then eventually you see things like they kind of shift and they take a tonal shift and just, from then on, it just gets real exciting, and I was on board for every second of it. So some people might think it's a little derivative, but I personally think that this movie was just heavily influenced by that concept and then just took it off in its own wacky psychopathic direction. And I would also recommend this movie even if you're not a really big horror fan, because as somebody who's not particularly a horror aficionado, I found it very digestible. It wasn't super gory, it didn't rely on that, and it didn't rely on like a whole lot of gross out scenes. It was so much more about the characters and the tension that built between those two characters and all of the things that it affected, because this movie is also kind of a little bit like that movie The Butterfly Effect also, which is another movie that I highly recommend. And one other thing that I'm not going to quite label as a negative, but I'm going to call it a non-positive thing, was there's this kind of subplot that plays into the main plot about like a shaman or like shamanistic kind of like rituals. And I thought that was a little like hokey and kind of like But for the story they were trying to tell, it made sense. For the overall narrative, I'm willing to forgive it, but I wasn't like super psyched about it. But the music was also really good. Some of the imagery that they used in the movie was extra spectacular, albeit it's supposed to be horrific and gross. But the craft that went into this film, I really respect the amount of work that they did. And they also left one thing open for you to not be so certain whether or not it actually happened. And I thought that was really creative, because I have my own little theory about one little plot hole that I believe they intentionally left it, but I'm not sure. Either way, it was a whole other aspect that kind of stuck with me afterwards, and that's what a good movie does. It sticks with you for a while and makes you think. And the cinematography was cool. There wasn't a whole lot of clunky, unimportant dialogue. The movie was like, it had the exact density that it really needed to tell the story. And I won't say that the CGI was anything special particularly, but you could tell exactly what you were supposed to be looking at, and that also played into all the crazy, wild imagery that they were able to pull off with this movie, so that was cool. But the last thing I'll say is that by and large, the third act of this movie is absolutely fucking spectacular. Which, now that I think about it, leads me to another point, is that this movie was really, really, really well edited, because the last act of the movie, it's very much akin to like Inception, how there's several different things going on at once, and there's like all this built up tension over different eras of time. It was so good. The entire ending of this movie is just straight wildin'. Like, you can tell how excited I am right now. This is how I felt right after I got done watching it. In other words, what I'm saying is I cannot wait to recommend this to other people. Not just you guys, but also in my personal life, because, that's what I do. Talk about movies and stuff. But anyway, overall, guys, I think you can tell by now that I had myself a pretty good time. So that being said, I think for a score overall out of 10, I think I'm gonna give it an even 9.0. The movie's not perfect. It could have used a couple little itty bitty tweaks here and there, but I can guarantee you I'm probably going to watch this movie again at some point in time. And I'm not a big horror guy, so you know it's good. But anyway, guys, those are my thoughts. What are your guys' thoughts? Have you seen this movie? Have you heard of it? Do you want to watch it now? Hop in the comments, let me know what's up. Other than that, if you like this review, as per usual, like, subscribe, share, comment, hit the bell, all that other YouTube-y type of shenanigans. And I will catch you guys next time.